One of my favorite things about Kelly and Kelso so far that's happened is I remember receiving a video from this dad, and he sent me this video of his son who was 10 years old, and he was reading Kelly and the Great Pinewood Derby. But his son had Down syndrome, and he was reading the book, and he was, following the words with his finger, and then he stops, and he looks up at the camera and goes, "Dad, he's like me. He's got Down syndrome." And it was like something clicked in my brain because this little kid with Down syndrome, he's reading it, and it's like for the first time, he saw himself in media form.
Hey everyone, welcome to Just Be Creative. I am Krist Norsworthy, and today I'm with Jordan Burk, who is a self-published author and illustrator, amongst other things. We'll get into that. We're going to talk about how he was inspired by his uncle to start writing, and his love of, creating, and his path that he's taken in order to get and to try to get his book out there and to get his book out there. And actually, he has 2 books published, and he is working on publishing his third currently as we speak. And it is September 28th, 2021. And it's been a while since we've recorded here, but hopefully I'll be getting out more of these on a regular basis. And I think we're going to have a good conversation today. So, hey, Jordan, you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
I'm Jordan Burk from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So, Texan here.
Great introduction. Thanks. Yeah, Jordan and I have known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
It's a funny thing because I lived in Dallas for a while, and we knew a lot of the same people, but we didn't really connect with each other until later. And it was around the time that I moved, I suppose, because that's kind of when Instagram was getting big, around 2010-ish, 2011, I suppose. So it's like we got connected, and Instagram back then just felt like much more of a, for lack of a better term, kind of community.
For real. Well, dude, I'm doing the math right now in my head, and that feels like so long ago.
Yeah. Well, 2020 feels like 10 years ago. So
This is true.
2011 definitely feels like a long time ago. But yeah, so it was pretty funny that we knew each other, and we're probably like texting and like group messaging and stuff for a good several years before we actually even ever met in person.
It was like 6 years.
And then, yeah, we all went and hung out in New Orleans.
Had a good time, yeah.
Yeah, so like I said at the beginning, you are working on a Kickstarter for your third book in the Kelly and Kelso series that you have. And I would like to talk about that more in depth a little bit later, but you just want to give everybody a heads up on where they can find you online and could find information about that before we get started.
Okay. You can find out more about Kelly and Kelso and my books at kellyandkelso.com. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all under Kelly and Kelso, KELLYANDKELSO. The books are also on Amazon.
Awesome, thanks. And then they'll be able to find your Kickstarter if you want to check that out at kellyandkelso.com.
Yes, sir.
Yep. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I guess do you want to just talk a little bit about, I mean, maybe how you even fell into self-publishing, because initially that wasn't even necessarily your original plan, right?
Yeah. So kind of my backstory, I loved drawing as a kid, and it was something I kept up until I was about maybe 12 or 13. And then after a few years of just being consistently bullied by, and this sounds really bad, but by like family and friends, I just kind of threw in the, you could say the pencil, but I decided not to draw for a few years. So I stopped drawing about age 12 and didn't start drawing until I was 25. And at that point, it didn't even take me long to get back in like the creative flow of things. I immediately started illustrating for other authors, and it was this really cool, exciting thing. And I love the idea of creating, art, but also having the written word to go along with it, and then seeing the final, product. And after working with a few other authors, I realized as much as I enjoyed pouring myself into the artwork, if I didn't really believe what the message in the story was, it just kind of left me feeling like incomplete and not fully, what's the word I'm looking for? Like fully complete in a way. So I finally, one day, I decided to come up with my own series. And I didn't really know what that would be. But at this point in, my life, I had been a caregiver for close to 14 years to my Uncle Kelly, who had Down syndrome. And during that time, we would go to the park, we'd go to the movies, we'd go out, to dinner, to the store, and little kids would come up and ask, questions like, why does he look like that? Is he okay? Just why does he have a stuffed animal? Just little things about Kelly, because he obviously stood out. And I loved answering questions. That was one of my favorite things to do. And it always kind of bothered me when you would see parents like pull their kids away and be like, shush, or, not give them the opportunity to, fully ask their question. And so I had this I guess it was in the grieving process too, after I'd lost my uncle. I had this idea of writing a children's book about Down syndrome, but it would be aimed at your typical child so they could have an opportunity to understand and love someone with Down syndrome or this disability. It wouldn't be so far out there, or they wouldn't feel so removed from it. Mm-hmm. And I just remember,
and not to cut you off, but to cut you off, with your first book. Yeah, I mean, my kids loved it. They even brought it to school with them. I guess it was National Down Syndrome Day
I remember
or something
that.
like that. Yeah. And I think Evelyn was in first grade or something like that. And she brought it to her teacher, and then her teacher read it to the class, and her teacher even bought went online and bought a copy. She was so inspired by it, and just the format that you made it into goes along with that. So. But I'll let you continue.
I remember that. And I remember how cool it was because every single one of my books comes with a fully produced song. And I remember her teacher taking the song that came with the book and they played it over a video of them showing off all their crazy socks for World Down Syndrome Day. And I just thought that was really cool that they associated the, Kelly and Kelso song with World Down Syndrome.
Yeah, it was awesome. Because your book's also, not to skip ahead, but your book also includes some questions and answers at the end of it too for kids. That's super helpful.
Yeah. So the whole premise of the book was to be fun and colorful and intriguing to kids, but also have an underlying message. And I think one of the biggest things for me as for being, I'm an inclusion speaker, is not having a Down syndrome book or not having a book on my newest book's on vitiligo, but not having a vitiligo book, but telling these amazing stories and including these characters with these amazing abilities in it is my main goal, so that kids can learn something while also enjoying a really, fun story. And so with the first book, it tells the story of my uncle, and he inspired the Kelly character in the books. And so it tells the story of just like a typical school day. And then it shows how, his friend Aaron in the book reaches out and actually helps him, build a derby car for the Pinewood Derby. And it shows how teamwork and all this stuff, it teaches kids how to be inclusive also. It shows them how to reach out to those that might not know how to do something or might need a little bit of extra care or help. And that was really important to me. It was also kind of a struggle because at this point, I wanted the Kelly character to be solely based on my uncle, and my uncle was nonverbal. He would say a few things like happy birthday when something went really well or he was excited, but for the most part, he didn't speak. So to write a story about a character that doesn't speak was somewhat of a struggle in the beginning. But then I realized when I think of my uncle, I think of how animated he was. And so thinking of him in that way helped me kind of describe and write what the Kelly character was doing. So with the Kelly books, at the very beginning, you have the story. And then I really felt it was necessary in the back to have a Q&A. And this is more for your parents and your teachers and guardians, so they could go over just basic questions a child might have about Down syndrome. And it's stuff like, is it contagious? If a child has Down syndrome, does that mean his siblings have Down syndrome or his mom and dad? Just questions like that we might take for granted that a child might not understand or might have.
So, and then, with the questions and stuff, of course, that's super beneficial once you kind of get through the story. And there's something for the kids to ground them. There's the story grounds the kids in it, and it's an enjoyable story for them. But then later it's like, oh, well, now I can actually explain to my kids what all of this actually means, what the issue at hand is. But yeah, so I remember, because I've been not with you through this process, but we've been friends through this process.
Yeah, you were one of the first people I called though when I published my book. I remember that though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean that's been exciting for me to see you do it. Self-publishing wasn't something you initially was just like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do, right? I mean, you said it's more fulfilling to do something if I'm gonna be inspired by the story, if I'm gonna write the story and draw it, all that and that kind of thing. But you've also tried to first go through different avenues. Was that right? Like you maybe try to get it published and that kind of thing.
Honestly, it kind of became a joke because their first season, I would say, I don't know what I'm doing. I just know I'm doing it really well. And it's because I left no rock unturned. I knocked on every single door. I looked down every avenue, every path, every opportunity I looked into. And
Mm-hmm.
self-publishing just seemed to make the most sense for right now. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't, my hope would be one day I get picked up and, my books can be published, by some big publishing company. But at this point in time, I'm still able to touch lives and speak into lives by self-publishing.
You hustle because I mean I've seen it even from afar. You know, you've been on local news. You do local readings at like Half Price Books, which are like a pretty big bookstore
Mm-hmm.
chain. I mean, you've traveled to schools, like you said. You contact musicians and artists and
Children's
have them
hospitals. Yeah.
write songs, and yeah, you're doing a lot of stuff and reaching a lot of people with it. So I mean,
It's crazy to me because here's my uncle. He was a man from a town of 300. He had a disability, and his story of and message of love and acceptance is like all over the world. And it's
mm,
crazy when I read articles that are being written about my uncle and my books over in like the UK or Australia. They love Professor Kelso because he's a koala. He's really big in Australia. And it's crazy to me, like I said, that here's this little man that most people would have looked at and just deemed not that important. And he's out
mhm.
here, changing the world for good, for the better.
This is going to be your third book coming out now, but like, what has kept you motivated? Because that's not just to keep writing books, but even finishing the first book, much less. So the last year and a half have been nuts for everybody, and you had a lot more plans of stuff to do, fan expos and things like that, which at least you've done some of those. I know, once the book is written and that's not finished, and then once it's illustrated, well, it's not finished. Once you've actually got physical copies, it's not finished. You've got to actually get out there and get it into people's hands. Like
Totally.
that's a lot of self motivation. Like, what keeps you going?
So, okay. So I have a question for you. Who's
All
your
right,
general audience for this?
I want to share people's story. Like, I guess the podcast is, and especially whenever we have guests on, like, I want to hear, I literally want to hear what other people their experience is, and that's really what the audience, I think, or I hope for this podcast is people who want to hear the everyday struggles of everyday creative people.
Okay.
And like, if it's a story I've never experienced, then I want to hear that. And if it's stuff where people are having similar experiences to me, well, then I want to hear that too, because then I'm not the
Cool.
only one.
That sounds
All
good.
right.
So I had this idea to write a children's book about my uncle. And honestly, I'd only told my parents. And so it's one of these things that I had maybe sketched out a few pictures of what the character would look like. And I remember going to dinner with some friends, and there was some interns from a church up in California visiting. And so while we were sitting there at dinner, one of them looked at me and she said, I have a prophecy for you. I have a word for you. And do you mind if I give it to you? And I'm a strong believer of take the meat, spit out the bones. I'm a big boy, in my faith, so I can handle that. So she gave me this word, and one of the first things she told me was, I see you playing video games. And then she paused and she said, no, it's not even video games. It's like you're drawing cartoons. Are you an artist? And I just was like, what the heck? So I'm sitting there and I'm like, yeah. And she's like, okay, well, I see you drawing. And she said, I see that opening doors for you to go into schools. And at this point, I hadn't done anything like that. I hadn't thought about doing anything like this other than maybe for a week or two, I'd been telling my parents, I want to write this kid's book about, my Uncle Kelly. And I'd love to be able to get in the hands of your typical kids so they could learn about Down syndrome. And I even had mentioned that might be, cool if I can go do like a book reading at a school or two, like in the area. So it was just crazy. So I took that as a strong confirmation of this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm called to do. So the first book was easy as far as like my motivation. A mountain would come up and I could plow right through it because I knew this is what I was called to do. The second book was a little bit more of a struggle because I released it in March of 2020, which is like when the world went down the crapper.
Plus all of the Kelsos that you had stuck in China.
Yeah, there's that.
we'll get to that because I want to hear that story.
So March 2020, I had this brilliant idea to release my second book, and it didn't take off. My true diehard fans were super excited about it, but it just never really, and to this day, really hasn't taken off. And it's my favorite book I've written yet and illustrated. So there was a part of me that was struggling with, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? The first book had blessed a lot of people. And I was curious, like, questioning myself, questioning God. Was it like a one-time thing? Was it meant just to serve that one purpose? Am I done with it? And I remember going to Austin for this music festival. It was a Christian music festival. And I was leaving. And as I was leaving, I was in the parking lot, had like my fold-up chair, everything with me. This girl comes running up and she goes, hey, I need to talk to the tall guy, which for those that don't know, I'm 6'6" and I have big hair. So I always respond to the tall guy. So I turned around and I see this girl.
Like I'm 6 foot, which means in most places I would be considered the tall guy, or at least taller than most of the people in the room.
But you're so tiny.
Yeah, well, that's because when I hang out with you, my brother and Jonah, who are all like 6'5", I look like a very tiny
you're
man,
the shorty in the
not.
bunch. But
I'm not.
So this chick comes running up to me and she says, "Can I talk to you? I want to pray with you and give you this word." And seriously, the first thing off her lips was, "When I look at you, I just see compassion and empathy for children." But it's not just your. She stopped and she was like, "It's not just kids; it's kids that require extra care." And at that point, I'm just like, "What the heck?" And so she goes on to give me this amazing word where she said, God wants to bless you. He wants to bless your business, but just keep pursuing him and just keep going on no matter the struggles. And the word was a little bit longer than that, but it was enough for me to realize God still sees me. And this is still what he intended for me to do. Because I had prayed multiple times after the second book flopped, if this isn't what I'm meant to do, then squash this passion in me because it's not going anywhere. Like Krist said, I'm out here hustling and I don't just sit and hope my books will take off. I'm constantly trying to schedule book readings. And in 2020, that was like near impossible because all our events got canceled.
Right. Yeah.
And
but also you do live in Texas, so
I do.
You're a little bit more than
but what is COVID again?
Else.
So, but yeah, no, it was 2020 was rough, but then, stuff started opening up in 2021. And I mean, I tried to work social media to the best of my abilities with, Instagram, Facebook, post, videos. I remember doing lots of book readings for different organizations because a lot of kids were trapped at home during 2020. And that was really cool because we would do live Q&As. And it, again, gave me an opportunity to interact with people and talk about Kelly and my relationship with him. I've always felt like I've had a heart to see the unseen. And my goal is to give a platform to those that don't feel like they have a voice. Right now, I have 2 books under my belt and they're both about Kelly, but I'm wanting to introduce more characters into Kelly's world with amazing abilities. And that's what this third book is about. It's about a little girl with vitiligo.
Sorry, I don't think we've stated this. Maybe we have or maybe we haven't, but Kelly obviously was an adult when you were his caretaker. Was he in his 50s or 60s when he passed away?
He lived to be 64, which is really good for someone with Down syndrome. Yeah.
Yeah. However, your books is Kelly as a child. I don't know if we stated that or not.
Yeah, no, I don't think we clarified that.
So the first book is The Race. Sorry, what is it called?
Kelly and the Great Pinewood Derby. So he's doing a derby race.
Pinewood Derby. Yes.
Which honestly, I have no clue where the inspiration came from for that. I wasn't a Boy Scout. I've never been to a derby race. And one of my least favorite things to draw is cars, capes, and weapons.
Right. Just you like to draw a Whataburger, but
yeah.
Yeah. So there was that. The second one was Kelly in the Space Cadets. What was it
Yes, sir.
called?
Yeah, Kelly and the Space Cadets.
Oh, nice.
And you actually played a really big role in that one. I don't know if you remember this. Do you remember?
I think I do, but yeah, you can go ahead.
So I wanted Kelly at this point in time. I had lost my dad, and I was kind of going through the grieving process. And the book kind of starts out dealing with grief because Kelly misplaces Kelso. And
Mhm.
it shows that you can still go on to make new friends and relationships, and it's okay to be happy even when you're grieving.
Mhm.
Spoiler alert, he finds Kelso at the end of the book. But one of the new characters I wanted to
Really?
introduce had Down syndrome, but he was higher functioning than my uncle. So I wanted someone that could hold a job, could read, could actually be interacting with people in the book, to where Kelly was nonverbal. So that's where we invented Cosmo. And I remember, I think at one point in the early drafts of my book, Cosmo was he didn't have Down syndrome. He was just a typical man. And I
Mhm.
remember talking with Krist, and I don't even know if I had written the whole book and you had read it or if we were just talking, but I remember you saying how cool it would be if Kelly had someone he
Mhm.
could look up to and if this character actually had Down syndrome. It took me a minute to wrap my mind around what that would look like, but then when I did, I was so in love with that idea, I couldn't stray from it. And so that's kind of how the whole Cosmo character came into play.
Yeah, I think that's a cool story too. Where it's still about people helping other people. But it's him as a Kelly as a kid in the planetarium.
Yes.
So I just lost that. I knew where it was. I lost for a
I
half
when
second.
I
I
when I
couldn't
was
remember the
speaking
name of the word.
when I was at an event speaking, I called it the Space Museum. So at least you got planetarium.
That works too. That's funny.
I don't know if I've ever told you. I think you know this story. So one of my favorite things about Kelly and Kelso so far that's happened is I remember receiving a video from this dad, and he sent me this video of his son who was 10 years old, and he was reading Kelly and the Great Pinewood Derby. But his son had Down syndrome, and he was reading the book, and he was, following the words with his finger, and then he stops and he looks up at the camera and goes, "Dad, he's like me. He's got Down syndrome."
Mm,
And it was like something clicked in my brain because I had written this book with
mhm,
one goal and one thing in mind. And that was for your typical children to explain what Down syndrome is. So they would have the
mhm,
opportunity to befriend someone with Down syndrome or reach out to them and not miss out on the opportunity of loving someone with Down syndrome.
mhm.
So that's why I wrote my book. But this little kid with Down syndrome, he's reading it, and it's like for the first time, he saw himself in media form,
Wow.
because so often they don't see themselves in children's books or on TV or in like a positive light or a fun, colorful way. And so
Mhm.
it just was so cool and just, so God for me to do it for one reason, but him to take it and use it for a completely different reason that
Yeah.
blessed a whole community of people that I hadn't even intended. And
Yeah.
I wish I could say, well, not that I wish I could say, it was the beginning of multiple videos that came in like that of these kids realizing like, oh, cool, I can relate to the Kelly, the Kelly character. And so that was really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's cool that like you did it and you're like, oh, like my uncle was so meaningful to me, and like I just want everybody to understand this kind of thing, and maybe it'll help other people. And but then to have that the reverse happen where like people are helping you, like you're seeing that and you're actually being blessed by it, or you're learning as this process goes on.
Totally. And honestly, I'm writing these books, and I would love the series to continue. We're introducing this little girl with vitiligo. My fourth book, it's funny because I haven't even finished illustrating the third one, but we're kind of already in the talks for our fourth one. It's going to be about a little boy with alopecia. And I'm actually going to work with Jonah and his son on that one. And I'm really excited about that one.
That's cool.
Well, I'm hoping for that one to be able to have his son actually kind of co-write it with me. So it'll
Mm,
be through his point of view since he
mm-hmm,
actually has alopecia. And
mm-hmm.
that's going to be completely different than any book I've done before, where it's all been about Kelly's life and stuff through my point of view. This is actually coming from someone who actually has had this. And
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see what he comes up with.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm interested in seeing that too. I think that's a cool idea. One of my friends who has it, like he saw the post and commented on the post that I had shared and was just saying like, oh, this is awesome. And he's my age, he's 36, 35, 36. And he was just saying this is cool because like it took him a long time to like come to grips with it or to feel comfortable with it, I guess.
Totally.
The fact that you're doing something that is going to reach kids, and not only, and now I guess you can even see that like not only are kids without this going to read it and then be more understanding, but kids who do have it, they will read it and think, oh, like here's somebody like me being represented. And you're going to inspire them and help them feel better about it and be able to come to terms with it, that they're not the only one. And kind of like what I was saying about this podcast, where it's like, it's really just like everyday creatives talking. And we get to hear each other's struggles and each other's victories and that kind of thing. And like hopefully it inspires people and hopefully people learn from it and like that kind of thing. You're doing that for other people through your books and for children too, so they can on both sides of it, people who don't have these things and are ignorant and then won't be anymore, and then people who are suffering with them to be able to come to terms with it, to be able to come to these conclusions and the terms with this decades possibly before they otherwise would have, or maybe never would have.
And the people that God surrounded me with, like yourself, and many others, that when I have y'all proofread my books, that I'm open to take y'all's feedback.
Yeah.
Because there's been a few ideas I've run by you and you've just been like, no, bro, like, no, too much pizza, too much Whataburger.
Yeah. Too much Texas. No kidding. But yeah, I mean, I think that I like that you bring that up, because you have had a healthy willingness to not necessarily collaborate, but to get feedback.
Totally.
And you are self-publishing, and you do take criticism, and every step of the way, you're like, hey, what about this? Hey, what about this? How does this picture look? Or can you look at the outline? Like, because I think even with the Cosmos story, that you just had like a rough outline about what the story was going to be, while we were talking about it, and I had kind of suggested it being, the adult version. So I mean, I think that's a great thing that you're doing, just bouncing it off of other people and willing to take the criticism.
Totally.
And criticism isn't a bad word.
No, and I remember when I first asked you to critique one of my pictures, you asked me like 4 times if I honestly wanted you to. And right, yeah. By the 4th time, I'm like, is it really that bad? Is he about to like rip me a new one? But honestly, what you pointed out and what you saw were easy fixes, but just things I had overlooked because I'd been staring at this picture for like 4 hours. So one of the reasons I remember wanting to step out and be the author and illustrator is I had spent months and months working on this project, not a Kelly project, another project with another friend who had written a book. And I received, like you said, criticism's not a bad thing, but I had received feedback. I guess sounds better to the ears. I'd received feedback on my artwork because I wanted it to be the best it could be. And I know I'm still like learning and I don't know everything about technique. And like Chris said, my shadows sometimes can be off, my lighting, where it's coming from, things like that. And so I was open to that. And there's a few things about the storyline that I could kind of see that were problemsome, like that could use some tweaking. And when I tried to bring it to the author's attention and was like, maybe we should have somebody look over this, they just straight out refused. And I was like, I couldn't understand that, because why wouldn't you want your book to be the best it could be?
Yeah.
And so when I look at even some of my artwork, even though it's technically mine and I drew it, I'm not always the mind behind every detail and characteristic behind these characters. You know what I mean? I get feedback I remember on the second book, I let a mom read it, and she basically told me, she's like, I love it, but like stranger danger. They don't have permission to be hanging out with this person. And right. I was like, I'm not a parent, so that didn't even cross my mind. So all I had to do is add a sentence in there where everybody kind of knew each other and this person had permission to hang out with these kids. And it totally made sense after that.
Yeah. And I'm a dad, so I just don't care, I guess. I was just like, yeah, sure.
Yeah. So that being said, there's things I see that like a mom, would totally nail and like see. Yeah. Or things that you would notice because you're an artist as well and you see it from a different, we're all a half a bubble off if we're an artist. So you
Mm,
just see it differently than I see it. And I
yeah.
don't know. I just never could understand why someone wouldn't be open to that. But I guess I don't know. So it's one of the reasons I wanted to step out and write my own books.
And I mean, you did get feedback from, I guess, publishers or bookstore owners and that kind of thing of saying like these kind of books just don't sell,
Yeah.
like that kind of stuff too, right?
Yeah. And that was a little discouraging. But like I had mentioned earlier, when that girl was telling me that she saw me speaking at schools or whatever, I always was able to fall back on my faith and be like, but God said. So regardless to what, these big bookstores told me, I knew this was what my calling was. This is what I was destined to do, was to spread kindness and love and teach inclusion in such a way that even little kids could grasp it. One of my favorite things that we have is we got these really cool t-shirts, and
Hmm.
they say kindness like a boomerang always returns, and they have Professor
Hmm.
Kelso on them.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite things about that is we work with the company Reeves Tees, and they hire young adults with disabilities, mainly Down syndrome, and they're the ones that package the t-shirts. And so whenever you receive one of our t-shirts, it's folded and wrapped up with a ribbon, and then the ribbon underneath it has a little card, and it has a picture of the person that packaged your shirt.
No, that's awesome.
I always thought that was really cool. If any company I can partner with that supports those with disabilities, I'm going to try my best to partner with them.
That's cool. I was just looking at your Amazon. So Kelly and Space Cadets has 5 stars, and Kelly and the Great Pinewood Derby has 4.5. So
Yes,
I'm just saying, Space Cadets, you might feel like maybe not as many people bought it, but it's got a higher rating. So
that's true. But there's always Karens out there.
um yeah, I mean, speaking of feedback, I know you've gotten some people who have said, oh, he's just trying to exploit this for the money, which is ridiculous, of course, but anybody who puts themselves out there to do something, and sorry, I don't want to compare you to Nickelback, but I think you like Nickelback. But anyway, what I've always said about Nickelback or Creed, Imagine Dragons, or whoever, like people hate them, right? And they're known for being hated, but it's do you know how many millions of albums those people have
Right.
like way more? They've done way more than
And
most people
they're
have.
not staying up at night. They're sleeping just fine.
Right. But you know what? Still, there's 7 billion people in the world, and most of those people probably don't know who any of us are. So you got to take this all with a grain of salt. If you're
Totally.
putting yourself out there, you're going to get negative feedback, and you're going to get hateful comments, or whatever. If people are coming across it, you're going to come across people who put negative feedback out there in I guess a hateful or toxic kind of way. So I mean, that just comes along with it. And if you were afraid of that, then you wouldn't have put yourself out there, and that could have kept you down.
Well, and honestly, I've had nothing but amazing feedback from all the parents at these events and of these children that have, disabilities. And that was
Mhm.
one of the things I was most concerned about, is how are these parents going to receive, a children's book, especially when it was so specific to my Uncle Kelly. Yeah, there's kids out there that have Down syndrome, and they can read and they can do all this other stuff. But it was important to me that with the Kelly character, he stayed true to my uncle.
Mhm.
And so that's why I love the idea of introducing Cosmo in the second book, because he has Down syndrome, but he's higher functioning. And so he has a job. He knows all these fun facts about outer space, and he can give a tour, and he knows every inch of the planetarium. And I love that because it also introduced another character with Down syndrome, but I was able to stay true to the Kelly character.
Mhm.
I can say probably one of the best things for me has been the Kelly series, because not that I was like this crazy, crass, crude guy, but it really has made me watch the way I present and carry myself.
Mhm.
If that makes sense, I'm like Mr.
Mhm.
Rogers in cowboy boots. So my goal is, no matter where I'm at, whether I'm associated with Kelly and Kelso, is to carry myself, as if I have my merch all over me.
Mhm.
And is to present myself as somebody that spreads kindness and love and acceptance. And I never want somebody to feel like they can't be themselves, or they, have a sibling or somebody that has a disability, whether that's autism, whether it's Down syndrome, and they can't, take them to the movies because they might be a little loud, or it might make other people uncomfortable, And so my job in that situation is to change the culture, change the atmosphere on how I treat that person or interact with that person.
Yeah. I would like you to tell the story about the plush Kelsos.
Plush
Plush
Kelsos.
Kelsos, right?
Yeah, that was fun.
Speaking of having to get over hurdles and to continue going and to
Yeah.
press through, because dude, I remember talking on the phone with you. You were like, maybe this is a sign that like I need to just quit and never do anything ever again. All right, y'all. Thanks for listening to this episode. You can hear the rest of that story and some more great discussion with Jordan and Burk on our next episode. You can check us out at justbecreativepod.com. You can check out Jordan at kellyandkelso.com. That's KELLYANDKELSO.com. Thanks for listening, y'all.